the month that we focus on the things that we're thankful for, that we can come in and gather as Idaho Realtors and affiliates to talk about the good that we have accomplished in, Jennifer's right, in an unprecedented year. So with that, Max Pond, I want you to know how grateful we are that you're here, that you are part of our team, and that you can keep us just up to date on what's happening at the Capitol. So come on in, Max. And David, I'm going to get to my inspection. I'm going to turn off my camera, but I will be listening, and let's hear some victories and the things that you see coming down the pipe.
Well, thanks, Marion, and thanks Title I for sponsoring today. And again, Marion, thank you very much, and thanks for a really great year this year. Pretty crazy year, as you kind of alluded to previously, but nonetheless a great year. And so really appreciate your leadership this year.
You got it. Thanks, Max.
Of course, of course. Well, again, my name is Max Pond. I'm happy to be here today. Happy to represent you guys as your government affairs director for the last about 3 years now, since 2017. I've been working for the association. And so today I kind of want to take everyone on a little bit of a journey about and talk about the election cycle Idaho just went through and the 2021 Idaho legislative session that's on the horizon in January. Now, to give just a little bit of background on the advocacy work that we engage in on IR's behalf and on your behalf, on our members' behalf, I want to review just a couple of key points about what IR advocacy is and what it includes. IR advocacy includes political or campaign efforts, legal and public policy or lobbying efforts. If you have questions on what those mean, go ahead and write those down now. I want to emphasize how important it is that we engage and that you give me the opportunity to answer questions that you may have today. The most important part of today isn't what I have to say and what I'm going to talk to you about. It's really if I can answer any questions you have or anything like that. So go ahead and keep that in mind as we roll through the program today, and please engage with me as we move forward. I see a lot of folks on, including Krista Deacon and some others that I'm going to mention today. So appreciate you all being here. As I mentioned, I want to look at what was an exciting, kind of an unprecedented, as we mentioned before, and almost an ever-changing election cycle this year. Now, I mentioned that it's kind of an ever-changing election cycle because, as you'll remember, in May, which is when the primaries took place, or were going to take place, Idaho went to an all absentee ballot, all mail-in ballot structure for that primary race. So that threw a new fold into our preparations and how we usually execute during the election cycle. So that's why I mentioned it was kind of ever changing. You'll also remember that the date in which you could submit your absentee ballot, when the clerk could receive that, kind of changed and was a little hectic from county to county. So it was definitely interesting. But as you'll see, it turned out to be a pretty good election cycle, both in the primary and the general election. So for the purposes of the election review, I'm going to take a look at races in the north, south, east, and west. We'll chat about why these races were important to our membership and by extension, our advocacy efforts as a whole, and then move towards some insights that we've been able to gain throughout the summer as to the makeup, the key issues, the length, and possible COVID-19 implications for the 2021 Idaho legislative session. So with that, I'll go ahead and move forward to the election review. And so to preface this, one of the two IR state committees that I work closely with is the IR Public Policy and Trustee Committee. The committee is made up of Realtor members from all over the state who are charged with voting on political races and causes that we get involved in, and what kind of involvement that might be. For example, during this last election cycle, and because of the leadership of the committee, IR played into varying degrees, whether that was independent expenditures, polling, contributions, or a mixture of those things, 70 different Idaho legislative races. And I'm happy to report that all 70 of those races that we played in, we came out on top in. And I think that's a big win for the association, a great investment of RPAC dollars that we find very crucial to what we do. At the local level, we also saw mayor, county commissioner, and other local elected official wins in Kootenai County, Blaine County, Bannock County. So as you can see from a macro level, IR had a great, highly successful election cycle, but I want to kind of dive into a more micro level perspective just a little bit and highlight a few races from around the state. Now, I tried to just pick four races, from each region of the state. But as I dove into those races, I kind of realized that there were some other races there that were interesting as well. So bear with me. It's not exactly 4; it might be 8, but just bear with me, and we'll go ahead and start in the north. So District 3 Senate seat, which was an open seat due to a retiring incumbent senator, Don Cheatham. This turned out to be a race that we invested early in the primary, and due to a three-way race where we had a clear preferred candidate in Peter Riggs. We heard this loud and clear from our local association up north in Coeur d'Alene. So we were involved, like I said, very early, involved in polling, independent expenditure, and ultimately a win in this contested and open Senate seat race in District 3. We really took a precision look at this race because Senator Cheatham was a sitting member of the Senate Local Government and Taxation Committee, which is essentially our bread and butter committee on the Senate side of the rotunda. On the House side, it's the House Revenue and Taxation Committee. They're both the taxation committees for the House and Senate.
Hey, Max, we're having some difficulty hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. You cut out about the time you were explaining the taxation committees.
Yeah. So both House and Senate have essentially a taxation will move through either the House or the Senate. So we'll see if Senator-elect Riggs will be seated on the Senate side tax committee, but nonetheless, we were very excited to see him seated this session.
So Max, question for you.
Yeah.
How do committee assignments in the Idaho Senate work versus the House?
You kind of broke up there. I can't hear you.
So how are committee assignments different in the Senate than the House?
David, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Just go ahead. We'll come back to the question.
Okay, sorry about that. I couldn't hear the question.
That's okay, we'll come back to it.
So in addition to District 3 Senate, the Idaho House District 2 seat B was another race where we were involved in very early on top with Representative-elect Doug Okonowitz, as well as District 5 Senate seat, which another win for the association where we supported incumbent Senator David Nelson from Moscow. Two other notable endorsements from the North. that I need to mention would be Sage Dixon and Jim Addis. I mentioned both these members because they are influential members currently of the House Revenue and Taxation Committee, both of which are credible candidates to become the next chairman of the House Revenue and Taxation Committee. Jim Addis, in fact, has been appointed the co-chair of the joint interim committee that's looking at property taxes. So wanted to mention those two gentlemen. Those are two key supports up north that came out on top again this year. So we're excited to see them. Moving to the East District, District 29, Seat A, which is in Pocatello, is what you could consider one of Idaho's very few kind of swing districts. By that, I mean, it tends to go back and forth between Republican and Democrat every so often. And we saw this seat flip in our favor, in our preferred candidate's favor this election cycle as well. In District 30 Senate, which was another open 35-member Senate chamber, we saw our favorite candidate win there as well. That's Senator-elect Kevin Cook. He seems to have interest in serving on state affairs or judicial. We work with both those committees on campaign finance and other critical issues like that. And then in District 34 Senate, another IR preferred candidate win, Senator-elect Doug Ricks, moving up from the House, the Idaho House of Representatives, to fill the seat of retiring Idaho Senate Pro Tem Senator Brent Hill. And so another retirement there, but happy to fill that seat with another Idaho Realtors preferred candidate. Moving on to the South, and in the South, we'll kind of talk about District 26 Senate, which is in Blaine County. IR was happy to support longtime Senate Minority Leader Michelle Stennett in her contested re-election bid. Senator Stennett's been great to work with for a long time and been a great ally of the association. And we're excited to see her continued work with us on the Senate State Affairs Committee, and really her close work with our local association in Sun Valley. I'm not sure if Ned's still on, but he could attest, and anyone in that region could attest to the close working relationship that they do have. And so we're happy to help her out and support her in her reelection bid. I mentioned Ned. She's got a great working record with him. But I mentioned Ned Burns, who we also helped in his reelection bid in Blaine County, and for his reelection for the Bellevue mayor, as well as a couple county commissioner seats over there as well. And again, we've got members all over the place that are involved in varying degrees. I mentioned Ned, a current mayor in Bellevue, but IR has members in the Idaho legislature. And one of those folks is the next person I'll talk about in the West District, which is District 11 Seat A. And we know him and his wife, Patty. Again, another seat that we got involved in early, conducted polling, independent expenditure, and other targeted campaign work to ultimately come out on top in November. We were happy to see that. Other key supports and wins in the West District include Senator Jim Rice, who is the chairman of a committee I mentioned earlier, of the Senate Local Government and Taxation Committee, and Representative Rick Youngblood, who's the co-chair of the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee. So before I move into the 2021 legislative session, it looks like there may have been some questions. And David, if you'd like me to address those now, I can do that, or I can wait till the end.
Well, Max, I think they're pertinent to to the topic you're discussing. And before you get into those questions, maybe one of the other things we'd point out is that there are 35 legislative districts in the state of Idaho. Each district has a state senator and 2 representatives. And so when you hear Max refer to District 11A or District 11B, he's referring to the representatives. And of course, the Senate has a senator per district. So that was one of the questions that we had. A second question we had was, you mentioned some of these candidates that IR has supported may be in line for committee assignments. How does the committee appointment process differ from House and Senate? Can you speak to that, Max?
Absolutely. Yeah, so on the, essentially leadership's involved. Leadership picks these positions, and those committee appointments are going to be happening towards the end of the week of the first, I believe it's the first week of December. And so essentially, if you're in the House, the Speaker of the House will assign committee appointments and chairmanships. Does that answer your question?
Well, and I think if you contrast that with the Senate, where Senate committee chairs are usually assigned by seniority within the ranking party. So if the Republicans have the majority in the Idaho Senate, your appointment as a chair is based on your seniority within the Senate and that committee. So there's just a difference between how people are picked. And I guess to your point, backing Senate members who are new to the Idaho Senate, the likelihood of them getting on some of these committees is lower simply because they haven't spent the time in the Idaho Senate that other folks have.
That's a good distinction. I should have pointed that out initially. I apologize there. Is there another question on this section?
Max, if you could, we had one additional question, and that was just in terms of the overall makeup of the Idaho legislature, what did you see during the 2020 election? Were there any big shifts politically? And if so, what did you notice?
I wouldn't say political shifts, although the turnover was larger as a percentage this election cycle than usual. It was about a quarter. I believe there's going to be 17 new members of the Idaho legislature during this new 2021 session. So the turnover rate was a bit larger as a percentage. I think that can kind of change year to year. A lot of those were some of those retirements that I had mentioned earlier.
Did we as Idaho Realtors lose any champions to retirement in the 2020 election?
Yes, we did, and it's a very sad thing for me to relive. But a great friend of ours, a great ally for a long time, Representative Robert Anders from District 12, did retire this year. He has been a lawmaker that has run 3 successful pieces of legislation for the Idaho Association of Realtors. He's a title guy, involved in the industry, gets it, really solid. So we were very sad to see him leave. I in particular was very, very sad to see him retire. But I do still talk to him every once in a while, get his perspective and things like that. But that was one retirement that really was sad to see happen. But his replacement is a gentleman, named Ben Adams. And I've met with Ben a few times. We actually didn't endorse Ben, but he seems to understand our issues and shouldn't be much of a problem.
2 more questions for you, Max. You were intimately involved in the 2020 election from a state perspective, working with a lot of candidates, whether that was through independent expenditures or endorsements. Any surprises during the 2020 election for you? Anything that jumps out at you as something that was either a surprise or unforeseen?
So yes, I would say that The loss of Representative Gerald Raymond in District 34 to former Representative Carrie Hanks was a surprise. It was a very tight margin of loss for Gerald. He was a helpful guy for us and a great vote for us. But that was a surprise. I was very surprised to see that. I thought that there was some kind of interesting news coverage of that race in Southeast Idaho leading up to election day and things like that. And so it was interesting to see how that turned out. But in addition to that, there weren't a lot of huge surprises on the political front. Like I mentioned, I think the biggest impact was some of those retirements, like you mentioned.
And one thing, just to make sure everyone understands, is that the entire Idaho legislature is up for re-election every 2 years. And so that's different perhaps from other states. It's certainly different from the federal level, but you have the entire legislature running every 2 years for re-election. So with that, Max, if you want to move on to your preview of the 2021 session, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we move forward to my sixth, what will be my sixth Idaho legislative session and my second during a global pandemic, it's kind of challenging to predict, to expect, what to be prepared for, fighting for a legislative idea like first-time homebuyers or eliminating the April 15th homeowners exemption date or lobbying against another issue. It's fun to have to kind of look at what, one way to kind of narrow that perspective or that view is to, take account of what we, IR as an association, what some of those things that we might be pushing might look like. So that'll kind of narrow our perspective and our outlook. And a few of the things that we can anticipate from my perspective is a very small fix to a bill that we passed last year, which was the April 15th homeowners exemption deadline fix. There's a small reference to a chapter of code that is no longer necessary. So we're going to clean that up and make that right. Possibly updating some language in the seller property disclosure to include electronic means of delivery. I mentioned Kendra Deacons on the call, and this is an idea that she brought up to me a couple of times over the last several months, and we're going to try to go ahead and move forward in fixing that this year. And then some work likely with the Land Title Association and the Bankers Association on some deeds related issues that I don't have the full picture on yet. I don't have any language on that stuff yet, but those are just a few things that we anticipate IR supporting and IR moving forward with in the legislative session. So now that we have talked about those things, we can kind of anticipate those. We can control those things. Now we have to look at what might be a natural progression. What might the tea leaves be saying, right? The next legislative session seems to be culminating into kind of like 2, maybe 3 harsh realities that I think are going to all come together essentially at the same time. And so those, one of those things would be property taxes. Again, this was a top issue last year and has been for years. Passing, what can be seen as property tax relief will be very important for, I think, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, both sides of the rotunda this year. We know this in part because of an interim committee that I mentioned a little bit earlier, the Interim Property Tax Committee, which was established in the 2020 Idaho legislative session. And they've been meeting throughout the summer. In fact, their next meeting, I believe, is tomorrow, which I'll be attending. But they've been examining the issue of rising property taxes in the state. Legislative proposals aimed at making local budgets more transparent, tinkering with the property tax formula freezing budgets and proposals to have, growth, quote unquote, pay for itself will all surely find sponsors, be introduced, be talked about, depending on different factors. We'll see some of those move farther along the process than others. But on this front, IR is going to continue to be engaged with the chairs of the House and Senate tax committees, the co-chairs of the interim committees that I just mentioned, as they wrap up their work. They're going to be coming to a conclusion here soon in preparation for the legislative session. So as much as we can influence and have a say in what proposals actually move forward from those committees to the sitting committees during the session will be critical, and will be an effort that I'll continue as we move forward here. Another issue that's going to be a big issue, I think everyone can understand, COVID-19 is another reality that we're going to confront in the 2021 legislative session. I mentioned the interim committee looking at property taxes, but there's a couple other committees that have met over the past several months, kind of during the off season, if you will, of the Idaho legislature, where there's still a lot of policy making going on, and through various committees, boards, panels, those types of things. But they have all been anticipating COVID-19 and talking about preparations for COVID-19. Those committees are the Legislative Council Committee, and believe it or not, the Citizens Committee on Legislative Compensation. The former is tasked with management of the official responsibilities, logistics of the Idaho legislature, and the latter oversees the state-funded compensation for Idaho lawmakers. These committee hearings have been highlighted, as I said, by COVID-19 considerations, protocols, contingencies that include accommodations for public testimony, public capacity, the way members can vote. They've been talking about a form of proxy voting, the layout of the House and Senate floors, the availability of House and Senate public galleries. What's the plan to deal with the public being allowed to go here? What happens if there's an outbreak within the Capitol? What happens if the Idaho legislature takes an extended break or recess? These are all questions that nobody truly has an answer to yet. And so the discussions have been interesting to listen to as we approach the 2021 legislative session. Another kind of reality that I think plays into what I was kind of just talking about, but is essentially the governor's response, since the outbreak to the pandemic, and particularly, steps the Idaho legislature may feel that they need to take in regards to the way that a legislative special session can be called, how the governor can distribute emergency funding, and generally, I think the scope of government intervention in the age of COVID-19, this is going to be a huge discussion point of the Idaho legislature this year.
So Max,
yeah,
it seems like the legislature really has two issues with how the governor handled the response to the pandemic in Idaho. The first, as you mentioned, was how the governor spent federal funds that the state received after the legislative session. And second, the governor's apprehension about calling a special session and then recanting and having a special session where the legislature didn't take up the issue of the pandemic at all. Maybe give people some insight into those two issues and how they may affect the legislative session in 2021, and what you're hearing legislators may do in response to the governor's actions.
Well, kind of exactly what I was alluding to. I think that there are a number of lawmakers that want to change the law in Idaho and allow for a legislative body, or one or both. And I think there's varying degrees of what they want to do, but they want to have the ability to call themselves back. They don't want to have to rely on a governor a governor's office that decides, that agrees with them. They want to be able to do that by themselves. I think when it comes to specific proposals, I haven't heard many, but again, generally the scope of government intervention, I think, is going to be a big discussion point. I think that there's varying degrees of support and opposition to Governor Little and his pandemic response. Specifically, it'll be interesting to see what comes down the pike, but I can assure it's going to be a top issue. Was there another question on this front?
Well, I think it just bears repeating that in order for the legislature to be able to change the dynamic of a special session, they're going to have to propose a constitutional amendment. And the people of the state of Idaho will have to vote as to whether or not the legislature should be entrusted with that authority. Because right now, under the Idaho Constitution, only the governor can call a special session, and only the governor can outline the topics that will be addressed during a special session. So if they want to change that dynamic, they're going to have to change the Constitution. That may be a tall order. I'm not sure how it shakes out this session. Of course, that vote would be 2 years away, and a lot of steam could be lost in that time frame.
Yeah, I think that we'll see some smaller legislative efforts pursued, but I absolutely, I think that a constitutional change will be pursued as well. And I think that that's why lawmakers are going to do both, is for exactly what you said, David. Who knows what it's going to look like and what the attitudes will be 2 years from now, but yeah, it's very interesting to follow.
So Max, news was made this week as Wendy Horman, a representative from Eastern Idaho, said that she will be running against Scott Bedke for Speaker of the House. Scott has served almost as long as any other Speaker of the House in the history of the state. This week, she not only announced her candidacy, but plans for how she would lead the House during the upcoming session. What are your thoughts on the contested leadership race for the Idaho Speaker, and what does that mean for the session as we look forward?
Well, I think what it means right off the bat is that there'll be some contested races right at the outset of the organizational session. So it'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out. Honestly, I think that the leadership races on the Senate side are a little bit more interesting, mostly because of retirements. Since Representative Horman, made this announcement, I think it was yesterday or the day before, but I've been able to talk to about 7 legislators in the House since then, and kind of took their temperature on it. And kind of depends on where they fall and on what side of the aisle they fall on, and to what degree they fall on that side. But I think, and most others that I've talked to think that Speaker Bedke will survive this leadership challenge. It is of note, though, that I think if he is reelected, and David, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if he is reelected to another term as Speaker, he'll be the longest serving Idaho Speaker of the House in Idaho history, I believe.
That's correct.
So it's interesting. It's a very interesting time, but I think that leadership races, and this was actually going to be my next talking point here, was some of these legislative leadership races. Again, I think that we know on the Senate side, what makes it interesting, is that we know that there'll be a new pro tem on the of the Idaho Senate for the first time in many years, with the retirement, as I mentioned earlier, of Pro Tem Hill. In all likelihood, that post will be occupied by a great lawmaker and another ally of the association, Senator Chuck Winder from District 20 in Meridian. But again, with that top post opening up, it opens up leadership races down the ticket. And so with Senator Winder coming from the majority leader post, we'll also see a new Idaho Senate majority leader and on down. And so it looks like for those races, at least for the Senate majority leader, it looks like there'll be a battle between Senator Kelly Anthon from District 27, that's Magic Valley area, and Senator Steve Vick from District 2, which is Dalton Gardens, North Idaho area. So if I had to guess on the minority side of things for leadership races, not much is going to change. Obviously, there's going to be some contested races on the House. The Senate side looks a little bit more exciting because we do know that there will be for sure changes there. So all very fun and exciting to look at. Were there any other questions on this section?
Yeah, quickly, Max. If I'm a realtor unfamiliar with the Idaho legislative process, what role does leadership play during the session, and how important is leadership, either majority or minority, in the course of any given session?
Great question. So, and it kind of depends on the House or the Senate, whether you're talking the House or the Senate, but in general, think of it like this. You know, on the House side, the Senate, or sorry, on the House side, the Speaker and the Majority Leader essentially run the floor and can essentially dictate which bills come to the floor and what order they move through the floor. And it's essentially the same thing on the Senate side, although obviously there's no Speaker on that side. There's the Majority Leader, and that has been Senator Chuck Winder. Again, he's likely moving up to the pro tem spot. So we'll have a new majority leader who runs the floor on the Senate this upcoming session. So that'll be very interesting to watch. And so yeah, leadership is important because they are able to have such a large say in legislative agendas, what bills are heard, and what moves on the floor and how quickly.
Well, and they're also the primary entity responsible for negotiating and dealing with the executive branch. And so leadership will often have weekly meetings with the governor. They will be carrying the legislative agenda and trying to negotiate that with the governor's office to make sure that both the legislative and executive branches are getting the necessary work of the people done over the course of the session. So there's a lot of power associated in not only setting the agenda, but being able to negotiate with the executive branch and come back and deliver that message to the legislators. So a lot of inherent authority in those leadership positions.
Absolutely. And you know, David, I can kind of just wrap up real quickly because I mentioned some of the lawmakers I spoke with leading up to this conversation. And so I just want to quickly touch on some of that stuff, and then we can open it up to finish out with questions. But you know, I wanted to get a bit of a lawmaker's perspective and not just give you guys my perspective on the session coming up. So I did talk to House Majority Leader Mike Moyle in the lead up to us talking today, and he is focused squarely on property taxes, property assessments, and another he thinks that if the legislature doesn't move and do something on property taxes this year, that there will be essentially a popular uprising with property taxes as their sole purpose for uprising. And so he wants to get some solution, as I mentioned earlier, on property taxes and property tax relief. Senator Jim Rice, chairman of the Senate Local Government and Taxation Committee, who I mentioned earlier, again, also focused on property taxes. Property tax relief has been a long time coming problem, a problem that has been persistent. You know, it was a big deal last year, and essentially nothing got done. The only real tax bill that was passed last year that I would argue would be our April 15th homeowners exemption fix, but I might be wrong about that. But Anyway, I just wanted to mention a little bit of perspective from some of the lawmakers that I've been talking to. And with that, I'd love to open it up and answer any other questions that folks may have here for the last 10 minutes or so of time we have.
Well, Max, as we're getting those questions in, it bears repeating, you had a tremendous 2020 session. Despite all of the chaos and uncertainty, you accomplished 3 huge things on behalf of our members. Being deemed essential services may be at the top of the list, giving realtors the opportunity to work through the pandemic. You've mentioned the first-time homebuyer savings account. You've also mentioned the homeowners exemption date fix legislation, all huge legislative wins. So congratulations. But I think we'd be remiss if we didn't also thank our legislative committee folks, some of whom are on the call today, our public policy trustee committee folks, some who are also represented, and maybe even more importantly, our state political coordinators who were in the first year of the program last year and were a tremendous help and part of that success during the session. So can you touch on maybe the SPC program and where we look to take that this year?
Absolutely. And yeah, I try to mention the SPCs as much as possible because, like you mentioned, I don't think it's any coincidence that in the first year of implementing that program, getting more members involved in the legislative process, that we were so successful. So real quick, SPC program mirrors NAR's FPC program, the Federal Political Coordinator Program. So we set up State Political Coordinator Program. Essentially, it's a liaison member from IR to each member and each district, legislative district, all 35 in Idaho. Again, last year was our first year. I think last year we had 18 or 19. This year, which is the second year, we've had interest grow by half. And so we have, I believe, 20 plus members on the SPC program. Again, 35 districts. We still have a couple districts to go to fill that out. But really what these SPCs do is help the association, help me, and the government affairs efforts that we do to message and communicate from a constituent perspective to these lawmakers. I like to mention that it's one thing for me as a lobbyist, as a government affairs director, to talk to these folks about, this is the biggest deal in the world and you need to pay attention to my perspective. But if they have a constituent come to them with a similar message to mine and a similar outlook to mine, it's going to speak volumes more than anything that I could ever portray or say to that lawmaker. And so it's really an effort to hone our communication with the Idaho legislature as a whole, and to get members involved in the legislative process and the political process, and to really have them help us be successful.
Well, Max, earlier, Governor Little took the state back in terms of the Idaho Rebound Plan to a phased approach, a stage 2 approach in response to COVID-19 and the increased cases we've seen around the state. I know that from our perspective, we're constantly vigilantly watching the essential service status in the state of Idaho to make sure that if realtors want to keep working, they can. You might want to let people know just how critical that is and your efforts behind the scenes to make sure that they stay essential, even as the governor wrestles with different aspects of the state's response to the pandemic.
Absolutely. So, the governor, the state keeps having to kind of go back and forth between these different stages, or at least the governor's choosing to do that. And it'll be interesting to see how some of this might be impacted by a new administration coming in, the Biden administration coming in. Will any of any national mandate or anything like that affect us here in Idaho and the position that we've been able to secure now, as you mentioned, being deemed essential. Part of the effort to make sure that that designation doesn't change is just very simple, straightforward, constant communication with the governor's office about the status of that designation and the status of anything moving forward. And so, really, what that is at this point, David, is just a constant line of communication with the governor's office to make sure that they continue to understand, which I believe they will continue to understand, how important it is to have an open real estate industry here in Idaho.
Thank you, Max. Questions, if you have questions, please feel free to type those in the chat function. We have time for a couple of questions. And maybe as people are doing that, we want to again thank our sponsor today, Title I. I want to thank Max for all of his hard work. Max, this was a great presentation, by the way. We sure appreciate it. A lot of wonderful information. Is there any, what's the, in your mind, if people are thinking about the Idaho legislature, what's the biggest difference between the House and Senate? Of course, they're elected every 2 years. They serve the same term. Give the people some idea of some of the differences between the House and Senate, maybe their function and what they do.
Well, I could say this: the Idaho House, and it's kind of funny because, you know, I did work in Washington D.C. for a while, and so there's actually a similar aspect of the House and the Senate that I'll kind of mention. And so I worked for Senator Crapo, obviously on the Senate side back in Washington, and you know, had the opportunity to interact with a number of senators and House members, and kind of sometimes see how they talk about each other. And I'd say that some of the same comments we had back in Washington, I've heard here in Idaho as well, and that's sometimes that the House is a little wild and crazy, and some ideas that fly out of the House could not even be heard or considered in the Senate. And so I think that you kind of see that almost every year. Maybe some folks will remember that there was a situation where the House and the Senate couldn't concur on what essentially they do at the end of every session and agree on a rules package. They didn't do that the other year. It threw the rules process, which is usually taken care of at the beginning of the session every year, into a bit of chaos. And so the governor was able to implement his red tape reduction executive order to remove what was seen as a strenuous regulation. So that's kind of a quick little anecdote of the House and Senate. They tend to agree on some things, but certainly disagree on a lot of big issues. I think that I'd end it with saying that the House, at least in Idaho at this point, you could consider a lot more conservative than the Idaho Senate.
And Max, maybe finally, although this was an election year for Idaho legislators, 2 years from now, the constitutional officers, including the governor, will face election. Not saying who, but do you anticipate a primary for Governor Little on the Republican ticket?
I think there will be. Again, I guess I won't mention who I think it might be, but there might be a couple people. But we'll see how that all comes out. You know, it's interesting. Well, I think a lot of it will have to do and be impacted by what happens in that regard in the response from the legislature to the governor's pandemic response thus far in this next legislative session in 2021. I think that will impact 2022 heavily.
Appreciate that. Want to thank again our sponsor, Title I today, and Jennifer for joining us. Want to thank Max. What a great webinar. Appreciate all of your insight, and want to thank our president, Marion Wadsworth. And just want to thank everybody for participating with us. We will have a Wednesday webinar in December. Stay tuned for that date and topic. And again, appreciate you joining us today, and thank you.
Thanks, everybody.